Starting with Shakespeare, we've got a chaos of background. We're only going to barely probably get into Midsummer Night's Dream today. Some of this is included in the study of Shakespeare introductory material in the text, but a lot of it isn't. So I'm going to start with just Shakespeare himself first. Traditional dates for Shakespeare's birth and death. Death we know, without a doubt. Birth date, there's still a little uncertainty. But most scholars will just tell you Shakespeare was born on April 23rd, 1564. We don't know the exact date. We have, I believe, the baptismal certificate, and it's based upon that and English custom at the time in terms of how many days after birth a child would be baptized, Catholic tradition. And so it's assumed April 23rd. He dies on April 23rd, 1616, and that's another reason we kind of just say he was born on the same day that he died on, because it was really close. So he died on his 52nd birthday, relatively young, 10 years younger than I am now. In 1582, when Shakespeare was 18, he married Anne Hathaway. She was 26, 8 years older than him. 6 months later, their first child was born, Susanna, okay? I didn't mention this in my first class. In Shakespeare's day, to be a 26-year-old unwed woman, that meant you were an old, to use an old phrase, an old spinster. Most women were married by 18 or 20, if not younger, 16 to 20. So he gets her pregnant. 6 months later, pretty sure this is November and this is May. His eldest child, Susanna, is born in 1583. 2 years after that, actually it's about 18 months, if I remember correctly. Early 1585, I think it's February of 1885, so 20 months. The twins, Hamnet and Judith, Hamnet, N-E-T, not Hamlet, and Judith are born. Hamnet dies in 1600, 1601, I think it is. Might be 1599. I might be confusing Hamlet with his father, who dies in 1601. But Hamlet does not live past his early teens, 14 or 15, okay? From 85 to 90, and there's a little bit of background about Shakespeare's father. He had been an important person in the county, started off as a glover making gloves, became an importer and stuff, rose to the position of mayor, fell out of power, out of favor, etc. It's not all that important. From 1585 to 1592, those 7 years are variously called the dark years, the lost years. Those are the only two phrases I can really think of that are used regularly. And they're called that because we have no idea. Well, let me rephrase that. We have no proof of what Shakespeare was doing that period. It's like he falls off the face of the earth. He's referred to in these periods by documentary evidence. We have baptismal and birth certificates for the children, okay? But from 1585 to 1592, there's no reference to Shakespeare anywhere. Just absolutely, that's been discovered. There could be something in some archive, some country house library, but there's no evidence. All kinds of theories have been proposed, beginning in the mid-17th century, if I remember correctly. For example, it's been suggested Shakespeare was a teacher, taught at a local school, not local to Stratford, but taught at a grammar school. Connected to that, it's been thought that he was a headmaster of a school, okay? Some have suggested he was a secretary to a powerful person, but there would probably be evidence of that. And secretary doesn't mean somebody does the filing, like today. Secretary is a person who handled all the correspondence, wrote the letters, things like that, okay? Speculation that he traveled the continent. and that's how he learned the foreign languages he knew. He definitely knew French, okay? He definitely knew Latin, and he knew some Greek, because some of his source materials were only available in French, Latin, and Greek. They had not been translated into English at the time. It's thought he might have known some Italian and possibly some German, all right? Others that he was a traveling actor from the late 1580s to the early 1590s. There were lots of traveling actor groups, okay? What we do know is that by September of 1592, when this guy, Robert Greene, publishes this, it's called a broadside, it's like a big sheet of paper, like a newspaper today, publishes this broadside called A Groat's Worth of Wit and 1,000 of Remembrance, something like that. A groat's worth is like a penny. In other words, this is like, a penny for your thoughts, okay? Well, he publishes this thing. He's on his deathbed. He'd gone to university. He'd written works of literature that were highly valued at the time. Nobody reads them anymore because they're horrible, all right? And he makes reference to this guy who has showed up on the London stage. He calls him a shake scene of a country, refers to him as an upstart crow who, with a player's heart wrapped in a tiger's hide, okay? Which is almost an exact quote from one of Shakespeare's Henry VI plays, which goes, with a woman's heart wrapped in a tiger's hide. And so he's alluding to this individual using that line from Shakespeare's play. And there are other little indicators in this publication that everybody says he's talking about Shakespeare, and he's jealous, and he's angry. For the simple reason that by that time, Shakespeare's made a name for himself in London. And he's, well, if it's 1592, he's what, 38 years old? Okay, so not that old, and Greene has been around for a while at this point, and part of what he's ranting about is there's all these newcomers coming in and stealing our thunder, our stage, etc. Okay? But the reason this is so important is it indicates Shakespeare didn't just so suddenly show up in 1592. He probably has to have been in London 1589 maybe, somewhere. His earliest plays are kind of dated according to what's called internal evidence. That is, there are references to things that are datable, okay, in some language kind of stuff. Probably 1589, 1590. His last play that he writes on his own without any assistance is 1612. So, say 1590 to 1612, that's 22 years that Shakespeare is writing plays. And 4 major long poems, these are several hundred lines each, and 154 sonnets. Just leave those aside. 37 plays in 22 years, that's almost about 1.5 plays a year. A little bit more, in fact, okay? And these are major 5-act, they're not like the Trifles little play that's in your textbook that takes like 5 minutes to read. Shortest Shakespeare play when it's produced, if it's produced including everything, it's about 3 hours long. Hamlet takes over 4 hours if you don't cut anything, okay? Which is why almost everybody, when they do a production of Hamlet, they cut a lot of material out. So that's a hell of a lot of stuff to do in that 22-year period, okay? In the 1590s, he's part of what are called the Lord Chamberlain's men. The Lord Chamberlain is like the second most important person in the government, next to the Queen. And they're called the Lord Chamberlain's men because he patronizes their acting company. What that means is he pays the bills, okay? Also gives them protection. If the Lord Chamberlain favors them, then if, for example, the Lord Mayor, the London Mayor, comes after them, they can just, appeal to their protector, okay? So Shakespeare's part of this group. Keep in mind, he's an acting member of the group. He's a shareholder member of the group because they did have stock. Okay, stocks aren't a 20th century invention. It goes back to the rise of the capitalism in the late 15th, early 16th century. Shakespeare got percentage of receipts for every production. He apparently was a pretty good businessman. Some of the only way we know things about him is because he is involved in lawsuits and real estate transactions, buying and selling property, all right? In 1599, the building that they've been acting in, okay, it was called the Globe. It was called the theater. Built in, and I don't remember if your book mentions the exact date. It was built in either 1575 or 1576 by, I always get these two mixed up, either James or Richard Burbage. One of those is the father, the other one is the son. The one who's the son is one of Shakespeare's co-actors. I want to say that's Richard, and James is the father. In 75 or 76, he builds a building called the Theater. He names it just the Theater, a place to put on plays. Okay? There had been no other building in all of England ever up until that point called a theater. Right? When he builds it, he leases the land upon which he constructs this building. Okay? In 1599, that lease comes due, which is like you take out a loan, it's like a promissory note. You have to pay it back by such and such date. Well, when the lease comes due, he's got essentially two options. Renew the lease, okay, or don't renew the lease, in which case the construction on the land becomes the property of the owner of the land. See, the theater is his, because he built it. The land on that the theater is built on belongs to somebody else. If he doesn't renew the lease, the theater now becomes that guy's land. So, in 1599, the Lord Chamberlain's men have the theater taken apart, so it's dismantled, and it's moved about 3 miles south to the south side of the Thames River that flows through London. And they build it there because in the mid-1590s, all the playhouses in London were shut down by the mayor of London because of plague. Plague spreads really quickly when you have people packed in together. And the Globe, as originally constructed, held about 3,000, the theater, held about 3,000 people. And they're crammed in today. If you go to the Globe today, you're kind of crammed. I got kind of broad shoulders. It gets really tight. It's been rebuilt to accommodate larger bodies because we are bigger, and I don't just mean fatter, we're bigger than they were in the Renaissance. I would be considered pretty tall in Shakespeare's day. Average height for a male was about 5'6", 5'7". Would make Tom Cruise just, feel great because Tom Cruise is a little short guy. Okay? So, they rebuild it on the south side of the Thames because that is outside the authority and jurisdiction of the Mayor of London. The Mayor of London can close everything down in London, but on the south bank of the Thames, he couldn't touch it, all right? A bunch of other theaters go up around that same time there also, okay? That theater then burns down in 1612. I think this is mentioned in your book. During a production of Shakespeare's Henry VIII, they fire a cannon. It's got wadding. It's got a blank. It's got wadding packed in. That wadding throws out, lands on the thatched roof. Whoosh! It's gone like within an hour. Okay. When an American filmmaker named Sam Wanamaker started rebuilding the Globe, Shakespeare's Globe, in London in the 1590s, they rebuilt it according to what they thought were all the specs of the original Globe, with only a couple of modifications. One, they made the seating, and it's all the same kind of seating. It's just wooden benches, okay? Like bleacher seating, just all wooden. They made those larger, so longer leg space, things like that. So it doesn't hold as many people as it did during Shakespeare's day. And the thatched roofing has a layer of fireproofing within it, just in case. Also has sprinkler systems, that kind of stuff, right? They don't use sound amplification, however, in the Globe. They do have a music and sound system, but none of the actors are mic'd, which is a real pain if you're there and a flight is coming in to land in Heathrow. Because by the time they get over the Globe, because it's in the flight pattern, they're literally only about 1,000, 1,500 feet high. And you get a 757 coming over, and the actors will just stop and look up like, if there's a sound from the gods. And it's usually really good when there is a moment in the play where there's supposed to be a noise. Okay. So, just a minute about the Globe. You've got a cross-section view of the Globe in your book. So, stage is about 42 feet wide, 24 feet deep. At the back of the stage, you have a building called the Tiring House. Remember, in ancient Greece, that was called the Skene, or Skene, S-K-E-N-E. Okay? You have the stage. If you look at the stage from a top view down, the stage has a partial roof, and holding up that roof in the front are two big columns, and the columns are about 2 feet in diameter. Okay? The underside of that roof is all painted. It's painted like the sky. So you have stars and the sun and moon. It's got a trap door and a thing that lowers and raises. So you can have a Deus Ex Machina scene, or you can have a god come down. Similarly, there's a trap door, so you can have somebody disappear. You can have flame and smoke and stuff come up from the bottom. You can also have people hang from this, and people can climb on the columns. One of the productions my wife and I saw of Midsummer Night's Dream, the guy who plays Puck was jumping and climbing up the columns and stuff. Okay? So, you have the gallery, which is the wooden structure around the Globe that has 3 levels. Right? Lowest level is the least expensive. Middle level is the mid cost. Highest level is the most expensive. Why? Because you get the greatest view. You get the best view, depending upon your seating. If you're over here, or here, here, you've got these, again, big, massive columns holding up the whole edifice. And they do sell seats, literally. If this is the column, literally like right behind. Those are called reduced visibility seats. They're usually fairly cheap because you can barely see anything, okay? Down here is called the yard. People paid a penny to get in there. They're called groundlings, okay? The floor of the yard was just essentially dirt, nutshells, stuff that people would bring in to eat during a production, and what they didn't eat, they would just leave, okay? We know from anecdotal evidence, that is people's diaries and such, that people would relieve themselves during the plays, just drop them, and if the plays weren't good, they would scoop up whatever was on the ground and throw it at the actors, okay? Which, makes it incumbent upon a playwright / actor in a company to make sure the plays appeal to not only the well-educated people who are paying good money to sit in the galleries, but also appeal to the groundlings. The groundlings are people with virtually, for the most part we assume, no education. That is, they haven't attended any kind of schooling. They might have been taught through their trade. We're going to talk about what are called the rustics, rude mechanicals in the play. People like some of the characters we'll see in A Midsummer Night's Dream. Weavers, bellows menders, joiners, carpenters, things like that, okay? They're going to be the ones largely standing here. Your book talks about high comedy, low comedy. Know all those terms that are in the introduction, okay? Low comedy, think Three Stooges, where what makes somebody laugh? You poke their eyes out, you smack them on the head, you make them trip, things like that. High comedy, verbal comedy, where you're going kind of machine gun style, rat-a-tat-tat, back and forth at each other. or you're making elusive jokes. Elusive jokes can be high or low, depending upon the content. If Shakespeare can make a joke, if he can pun on something, he will. Even if it's only mildly funny. Okay? He just, he takes every chance he can to appeal to both levels. All right? Going to talk about that later. Your introduction mentions the three biggest genres, three greatest genres of plays Shakespeare writes: comedies, histories, and tragedies. There is a fourth genre. He only writes 3 or 4 of these kinds of plays. Romances. Romances involve, kind of a magical element. Literally, in the 2 I'm thinking of, 3, Winter's Tale, The Tempest. There's another one that I'm drawing a blank on. Do involve magic, okay? Supernatural, things like that. Where you have a love interest, a problem, it gets resolved. They're not like the romantic comedies. The romantic comedies are meant to be comedic in the modern sense of hilarious, okay? But they're structured like this. So when we talked about Sophocles, we talked about the pyramid structure, okay? Where the tragedy begins with some kind of conflict. How does Oedipus the king open? The city of Thebes is being destroyed by a plague. They've got to find out what's causing the plague. It's the person who killed Laius. You got to get rid of that. So you get the conflict, you get the exposition, you get the complication. It leads to the climax. The climax is Oedipus comes to this realization: I am the plague. Okay? You get that recognition and the reversal. He's risen to the top, and now his fortune's reversed, and he falls, so that at the end of the play, what do we see? Oedipus being led out of Thebes. Okay? Flip that upside down for comedy. In a comedy, you also begin with a tear or rupture in society. Just like a tragedy does. The only difference is that by the time you get to the conclusion of a comedy, society is repaired. Society is restored. Is the Theban society fully repaired and restored at the end of Oedipus or at the end of Antigone? Not at all. Why? Oedipus is gone. Antigone's dead. Haman is dead. Eurydice is dead. Creon's left with essentially nothing. Okay? So, at the moment of climax in a comedy can go one of 2 ways. If the movement, if the reversal doesn't lead to, if the climax doesn't lead to a restoration of society, you flip it the other way and it becomes a tragedy. Think Romeo and Juliet. Everybody knows that play. Whether you've read it or not, you're familiar somehow with it. How could it become a comedy? If they don't kill each other. If the course of love does run true. We're gonna hear the line in here: the course of true love never did run true. Okay? But we're gonna see it run true because of improbable, irrational things that happen in the woods, okay, that cause ultimately society to be restored, okay, in this play and in the other comedies, all right? Two other things. I think I said this when we first began talking about, I think, the first day of the class. Just as with the 2 works of fiction, excuse me, 3 works of fiction we read, you got to take your 21st century mindset and throw it out the window. And you got to enter 1890s Mississippi or 1940s Mississippi or 1940s Georgia And just so you have to enter 5th century or 10th century BC Greece, you got to do the same for Shakespeare. And at the very least, you got to try to get back into a Renaissance mindset, or in the case of Midsummer Night's Dream, 1000 BC kind of mindset. So what does that mean? In Shakespeare's day, it was thought everything that existed like in a chain of existence. Term that was coined 150 years after Shakespeare, not quite that long, 100 years after Shakespeare, the great chain of being. Okay? So everything that's created is connected. All right? The highest form of being would be the highest level of the angelic realm. Toward into classical Christian theology, there are 9 ranks of angels. The lowest rank, your common everyday garden store variety angel, is just angel. All angel means is messenger, right? The highest is the cherubim or seraphim. They're the ones constantly in the presence of God, so to speak, okay? So what comes after the angelic realm? Us, humans. Do we have that kind of hierarchy? Maybe not in the 21st century, though I would say, yes, we do. But definitely in the Shakespeare's day. Why? Who's the monarch of England? Queen Elizabeth I. Her daddy was Henry VIII. Okay? So you have queen, king or queen, at the top. What's the lowest of human society? Peasant, slave, whoever is down there tied to the ground, so to speak. Next level, the animal realm, king of beasts. Proverbially, most people would say, the lion. That's why it's named Leo. Okay? Leo means king. King of the beasts of the air, the eagles. King of the ocean, gray whale, blue whale. King of trees, down to the plants. Redwood, largest tree, longest living. Down to the very smallest, muon, gluon, whatever aspect of quantum physics, okay? So everything exists in a chain. Now we're going to be introduced very quickly to fairies. Where are they? Because we would say, 21st century mentality, they're not real. They don't exist. But they have to exist because they're going to show up in the play. They got to be somewhere in here. They're not beneath us. Why? They have powers and abilities we don't have. They can make themselves invisible. That's kind of more like the angelic realm. They can go around the world in 45 minutes or so. That's kind of more like the angelic realm, okay? So they are at a level above us, but beneath angels. This would be, fairies, you could just put like spirits, okay? Ancient Greek would call them daemons. D-A-I-M-O-N-S or D-A-E-M-O-N-S. It's the word from which we get demons. It just means spirit of the air, all right? Shakespeare has others of these in other plays. So the fairies are above us, but beneath the angels. Notice, we're above the animals. But we can act animal-like. We can act beast-like. If we give into not our higher aspirations, but our baser needs and such. So this is really important because just like a chain, if you ever played roller skating or something like that, whiplash, where you make a chain and you get moving really fast and then you can swing and the people at the end go flying off the end. Take a chain, swing it like this and cut a link, and what happens? Everything beneath that link falls. Everything loses structure, loses order. So the great chain of being is important because it was thought, if something happens higher up, that affects everything down lower. Okay? It's a theological issue. The fall occurs where? Satan. Highest of the angelic orders. Everything below that is affected by that. So if something happens in the fairy realm, it affects everything below that. That's us. Notice, I need to come back to anti-Stratfordians. Just a moment. I was going to say, notice we're going to be introduced to the fairies very soon. The play opens with this rupture happening quickly. The rupture isn't only because of human choices. It's going to have something to do with the fairies. Let me get to this real quickly. Anti-Stratfordians are people who say the William Shakespeare, who came from Stratford-upon-Avon in Warwickshire, was not the person who wrote the plays attributed to William Shakespeare, Stratford-upon-Avon. Okay? They do that for a couple of reasons. One, Shakespeare, as far as we know, never attended university. And it is thought by the anti-Stratfordians that only someone who attended a university, who had a university education, could be smart enough and well-read enough to write the plays. Okay? That is a very elitist attitude. That says, the only way you could do this is to have been really, really, really well-read. Now, I'm one of those who don't agree with that. And I would say, Shakespeare was really well-read. It's thought, we don't have proof. It's thought that Shakespeare went to the local grammar school in Stratford. Why? Because his father had been mayor. And if your father's been mayor, that means you're at a certain level of society that it would be expected for you to go to that school. The records of who attended the school are incomplete. Okay, we don't have all the years. Shakespeare would have, if he attended it, he would have attended from the year probably about 6 years old, maybe 5 years old, to 12 or 13 years old. In that education, he would have learned Latin and Greek. Beginning probably about his second year, all the instruction would have been in Latin. So he would have been learning geometry, philosophy, music, arithmetic in Latin. Okay? Ben Jonson, contemporary of Shakespeare's, wrote a poem after Shakespeare died. And the poem was an epitaph. And in it, he said, though he had little Latin and less Greek. Well, the anti-Stratfordians take that to mean Shakespeare had no Latin and obviously even less Greek. Most Shakespeare scholars say that's not what Jonson meant. Jonson meant little Latin and less Greek compared to Jonson. Jonson was a classicist. Everybody regarded Jonson as being kind of the master, the best you could be. It's thought that if Shakespeare went to the local grammar school in Stratford, he would have left that school at 12 or 13 years old with the amount of knowledge of Latin and Greek as a college student today who attended the University of the South, Sewanee, majoring in classics. I knew somebody who majored in classics there. She had pretty good Latin and Greek. Shakespeare would have had the same amount as someone who majored in it for 4 years. Okay? He would have read original material in Greek, original material in Latin. And the person who wrote the plays had to have known Latin and Greek because some of the sources had not been translated into English yet. The person who wrote Midsummer Night's Dream had to know French because some of the plot comes from a French text. By the way, nothing Shakespeare writes is original. He takes all of his ideas from others. It's what he does with them. It's what he adds to them. It's how he twists and changes them that makes it all so brilliant. Okay? So the anti-Stratfordians, they're like, well, he couldn't have written this stuff. There's not good evidence for that. Okay? There's more evidence to say the guy who lived in Stratford-on-Avon did write this material, right? Okay, one last thing. Before we get into, and this is part of the introduction to, Midsummer Night's Dream. Remember with Sophocles, Aristotle wrote his book On Poetics, and he based most of his findings on poetics on what Sophocles did in Oedipus the King. And part of what he did is he came up with those three unities: time, place, and action. The time of a play occurs within a single 24-hour period. The place all occurs with those plays out in front of the palace. And the action, you have one single plot. By the time we get to Shakespeare, that's all out the window. Okay? You're going to see with Shakespeare two settings: in Athens and in the wood. Okay? You're going to see, so two settings, so place is gone. It takes place over 4 days. We're going to hear the opening lines. We're getting married in 4 days. And by the time we get to Act 5, it's the 4th day. Okay? So unity of time out the door. What's the plot? You have multiple plots. You've got the four lovers plot: Hermia, Lysander, Demetrius, Helena. Hermia and Lysander love each other. Demetrius wants to marry Hermia. Helena is in love with Demetrius. That's one plot. You have another plot of Theseus and Hippolyta's marriage. You have another plot of Titania and Oberon's marriage. Notice, the overarching plot is about love and romance and marriage. Okay? But it's played out in all these little different ways. And then you have, the characters called the rustics, and their little plot comes in, right? Okay, I think that's everything. So, look at our dramatis personae in 1181. You have Theseus, Duke of Athens. Theseus is a mythological character. He's like Oedipus. He goes back to pre-1000 BC, all right? He's the guy who killed the Minotaur. A Minotaur was half man, half ox, bull, okay? Had all kinds of martial victories and such, including the one we're going to read about very quickly, okay? Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, betrothed to Theseus. What do you know about Amazons? Other than Gal Gadot played one. They were archers. They were a warrior tribe of women. They only had men in the tribe for two reasons. One, sex, to propagate the Amazon tribe or clan. And two, slaves. They did the cooking, cleaning, all that kind of stuff. Okay? The Amazon women were so fierce, so focused on being good archers, that according to myth, depending on whether they were right-handed or left-handed, they would chop off one of their breasts. So if they were right-handed, hold the bow like this, pull the string back, stand like this, chop off that left breast, so that when they let go of that string, it wouldn't hit. And if they're left-handed, the other. What does that tell you? I mean, you got to be pretty intensely, devoted to your craft as a warrior to do that, right? So she's the queen of the Amazon. She is betrothed to Theseus. And then you have Philostrate, master of the revels. She's unimportant for our purposes. Aegeus, father of Hermia. Okay? He's only going to be important to introduce the conflict. All right? Hermia, daughter of Aegeus, in love with Lysander. So these next four characters, these are generally called the lovers. Right? Lysander in love with Hermia. Well, that sounds fine, right? She loves him, he loves her, no problem. Demetrius in love with Hermia. Now we have a problem. Two men vying for the same woman. Helena in love with Demetrius. Okay? Then we get the fairies. Oberon, king of the fairies. Titania, queen of the fairies. Puck or Robin Goodfellow. Puck, by the way, is an ancient character. He's not English in origin. He is what's called Indo-European. We find the character of Puck or like Puck in English literature, Germanic literature, Slavic literatures, Indian literatures, like the Indian subcontinent. There he's called the Pook, P-O-O-K, or P-U-K, okay? He's a trickster. Think Loki. He's like Loki, okay? And then a bunch of other minor fairies. Then we have what are called, variously, the rustics, the clowns, or the rude mechanicals. Rustics, I kind of like this term best. Clowns just doesn't fit. Because we have a notion of clowns today, right? The funny hair, the big nose, the floppy shoes. They're not that. These guys are tradesmen. They're men who work skilled trades. We have Peter Quince, a carpenter, so he builds houses, he builds structures. We have Nick Bottom, a weaver, he makes cloth. We have Francis Flute, a bellows mender. Well, you need a bellows mender if you have a smith in town, a blacksmith, because a blacksmith needs a bellows to blow air on the fire. You have Tom Snout, a tinker. A tinker is someone who kind of is like a jack of all trades, okay? Snug, a joiner, that's a particular kind of carpenter. That's a guy who makes furniture. He makes tables, he makes chairs, he makes dressers, he makes doors, windows, okay? Robin Starveling, a tailor, takes the cloth that Bottom weaves, you know. Those characters are going to play other characters. Because Shakespeare in this play, it's one of the plays where he gives us a play within the play. He loves doing that. He's going to do it also in Hamlet, all right? So, we're told the scene, Athens and a wood near it. So, Athens represents reason, law, order, civilization, culture, morality. The wood, everything the opposite of those. Irrationality, chaos, anarchy, fantastic things happen there, dream-like area, okay? So, Theseus comes in with Hippolyta, his to-be queen. I mean, she is a queen in her own right, but he's going to marry him. And he says, now, fair Hippolyta, our nuptial hour draws on apace. 4 happy days bring in another moon, but oh, methinks how slow this old moon wanes. So, he refers to days. Days are governed by the sun. And he says, these 4 days will bring in a new moon. It's 4 days to the new moon. It's 4 days till their marriage. And he's talking about how slow the time is going. Why? Why does he think time is going slow? Any of you graduating this semester? No? The semester you graduate, it's going to seem like time just slows down because you can't wait. You just want to be done. I mean, you're experiencing that already in this class. You can't wait to be out of here. That's what he's talking about. He really wants to get married. Okay? And she says, 4 days will quickly steep themselves in night. Notice, it's not going slow. The 4 days will quickly, look at the verb she uses, steep themselves in night. We only use that verb today for one purpose. But you know what it is? Tea. When you make tea, you've got the tea leaves, and you put the water in, and what happens to the water? And when you pour it in, what color should it be? It should be clear. And it goes dark. So 4 days will steep themselves. They'll quickly take on. She's saying, no. That time's going to go by really quickly. And then she says, and 4 nights will quickly dream away the time. First use of the word dreams. What, 6 lines in? 7 lines in? Title of the play, A Midsummer Night's Dream. When is midsummer? Beginning of summer is June 21st or 22nd. Sometime in July? Probably. Yet we're going to have a reference to the rites of May in the play. It doesn't mean it's set in May. It is set in the middle of summer, right? I've asked a question before on a quiz. I've said, I don't know if I got it on this one. When is the play set? And I have had people say December, January, no reason for those, okay? So, she says, and then the moon now bent in heaven shall behold the night of our son. Just hold your horses. So, he's champing at the bit, to use the horse metaphor again. Can't wait, and she's kind of implying what? Just, it's kind of, don't worry, calm down. It's like she's not as excited to get married. Okay? So he tells Philostrate, or Philostrate, however you want to pronounce his name, go stir up the Athenian youth, why? So that we can have revels during our wedding. Aegeus comes in with his daughter, Hermia, and Lysander and Demetrius. And Aegeus greets the Duke, and the Duke says, how you doing? And he says, I come with vexation, full of complaint against my child, Hermia. And then he tells, so she's like right here next to him, and he says, Demetrius, take center stage. This man hath my consent to marry her. Okay? I have told him, you can marry my daughter. Notice, he hasn't said anything about his daughter, really. It's just, I favor him. And then he tells Lysander to stand forth. And this man hath bewitched the bosom of my child. What does bewitched mean? Put a spell on? Kind of. He doesn't mean it literally. He means he has stolen her heart. Okay? Thou, Lysander, thou hast given her rhymes and interchanged love tokens with my child. And so he goes on and explains the kinds of things Lysander has done to bewitch his daughter. Now, but by bewitch, he really means he's tricked her. What's he saying about Lysander's affection for his daughter? Or what's he suggesting about it? It's not real. It's not true. All right? And he says, he has, line 36, with cunning hast thou filched my daughter's heart. Filch means stolen. Right? Turned her obedience, which is due to me, to stubborn harshness. Think of that great chain of being again. We talked about within the human realm, you have the king or queen, royalty at the top. But everything in humanity also has its own hierarchy. So, society is made up of what? What's the smallest unit of society? It's not the individual, it's the family. The family has a hierarchy. Shakespeare's day, ancient Greece, what is it? Father's at the top. Where's the daughter? Bottom, below the son. Okay? Daughters couldn't inherit in ancient Greece. They could in Shakespeare's day. All right? He's saying, she owes her obedience to me. She ought to do what I tell her to do. I want her to marry Demetrius. She doesn't want to. So, he says to the Duke, here's what I'm asking you for. If she doesn't consent to marry Demetrius, I beg the Athenian law, which is, she dies. If she doesn't marry who I want her to marry, she has to be executed. So Theseus says, what do you say, Hermia? Be advised, to you your father should be as a god. Why? Because he has composed your beauties. He has imprinted your form. And this is all language common language from Shakespeare's day. It was thought that the father imprinted the form of the child on the mother. Like the mother was just totally, like wax. It's the language that's used, okay? So, he finishes saying, Demetrius is a worthy gentleman. What's wrong with Demetrius? She says, so is Lysander. Lysander is worthy. Oh, you're right, he is. But he lacks one thing, your father's voice. You're right. In and of themselves, Demetrius and Lysander are equally worthy, Theseus says. But the one has your father's choice. I would my father look but with my eyes. What does she mean? I wish my father looked at Lysander the way I looked at Lysander. Now read into that a little bit. How does she look at Lysander? Romantically, erotically. She loves him. She wants to marry him. She wants to have sex with him. In that order, in Shakespeare's day, okay? I would my father looked at him the way I do. Okay? You're laughing. The groundlings down here are gonna go, yeah, this is great stuff. There's all kinds of homoerotic humor here. Okay? Meanwhile, the educated, snobby ones sitting up here, oh, how gauche, how rude that is of him. Shakespeare has got to appeal to both sets of audiences. Why? Well, remember what's on the ground. If the groundlings aren't kept happy, you're going to get crap, literally, thrown at you. Okay? So, you're right. In himself, he is. Okay? I would but my father looked with my eyes. Rather, your eyes must look with his judgment. Notice, she's looking with the eyes of what? Reason? Judgment? Love. Passion. No. You've got to look like your father does. In other words, pull out the legal pad, pros and cons. So she says, I know we've only got 2 minutes. She says, okay, Lord, I don't know what makes me so bold, but I just got to ask. What's the worst that could happen to me if I don't marry Demetrius? He gives her, can't do that anymore. I can't do that with either hand. 3 choices. What are the 3 choices? Well, one of them is marry Demetrius. If you're not going to marry Demetrius, she has 2 others. Notice he's expanded what Aegeus is called for. Because Aegeus said if she doesn't marry him, kill her. So die the death, marry Demetrius, or third one, he says, you'll become a nun. Not a Christian nun, this is long before Christ. A nun to the goddess Diana, the goddess of chastity and virginity, the goddess of the cold, frozen, frigid moon. And he says it in language like this. Know of your youth, examine well your blood, whether if you yield not to your father's choice, you can endure the livery of a nun, to live a barren sister all your life. Notice the language about question your desires. Know of your youth. Examine well your blood. In other words, he's saying, Hermia, you're probably a late teen, young woman, hormones raging through your body. Do you think you could never have sex for all of your life? And not just never have sex, never speak to another man for the rest of your life. He says, no, if you can't do that, then it's die or marry. She says, no, so will I grow, so live, so die, my Lord. Before I yield my virgin patent up unto his lordship, before I give my virginity to him. Why? Because she's thinking, this is like, what's the phrase? Licensed rape. I don't want to marry him. He's making. He said, no, you don't have to tell me now. Don't have to. Tell you what, I'll give you 4 days. So when does she have to announce her decision? What's happening in 4 days? Their wedding. So he and his future wife are getting ready for their wedding on that day, and Hermia is going to come in and say, I take death, and it's going to be that day. It's like Person Hooper showing up for the wedding, with the black veil on. That's not a good thing, okay? It's 10:06. We'll stop. We'll pick up around 95 or so on Wednesday.